Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Unfiltered Historians Unfiltered Conversations. We have a really cool one tonight because we're going to go over just a little bit about Tim and I's trip yesterday. We took a little trip down to Yorktown, Virginia. Some of you may have heard of it. I know my friend Darren over here has definitely heard of it. Well, and there he goes again. I have to tell him to come back every time.
I'm only mucking about.
Well, any time at the mention of Yorktown or Washington, Darren seems to vacate the premise. So,
Oh, but you told me we was talking about the Yorktown siege in the Peninsula campaign, not the other one.
that's how we trick you to get into this conversation, sir. And Braceface Jerry over on YouTube, thank you for joining in and watching us tonight. We are talking a little bit again about our trip and what we went to go see and what we did, and then maybe a little bit of history about Yorktown and Jamestown as well. Jamestown's not really on the top priority list. We really want to focus more on Yorktown and let Tim do his wonderful overview of.
Can teach me a little bit about the revolution, because I know nothing about it really.
And also, I just want to drop a really quick plug because we did get a sponsorship here a couple days ago, which is really cool. W Energy, thank you so much for that sponsor. If you guys like it, go to the website, 10% off code. Just type in the Unfiltered Historian in all caps and make sure you get the Dragonberry flavor, the Dragonade. So good. Great stuff. Quick plug for them. But now we want to get on to the fun stuff tonight. I blame Tim for this too. He got me into mead.
Don't blame me. I didn't do anything.
Yes, you did. You recommend all that takes for you is a recommendation. We got the Revolutionary War, some stuff in World War I that I've had to look at. I went down to Yorktown. It was just like, damn, I had this whole plan on studying some Titanic stuff and Civil War stuff. And then when I get home yesterday, I take all my books that are in my living room that I'm currently studying, and I go and shelve them all on my little closet wall. And I have a stack of ever-growing Revolutionary War and Jamestown books accumulating in my living room. So, recommendations be damned, right? Well, anyways, Darren, Tim, thank you guys so much for joining tonight. And all of you watching, whether it's live or afterwards, we do appreciate your presence. Let's start out by our trip, Tim. What say you?
I don't know. It was your first time going there. I think you should give your impressions, and then I should...
Fair enough.
Whatever.
Really? I thought you'd been there before, Tyler.
So I went on a 4-H trip when I was 4-H camp back in like 3rd, 4th grade, which was quite a long time ago for me now. And we didn't really
shorter then?
A little bit. A little bit. It was like 3.5 feet tall. Something like that. Who knows? Maybe 4.5, 5.
So he was a hobbit.
Something like that. That's the funny. Yeah, I was actually significantly shorter up until like 6th grade, and then I just like shoot up out of nowhere and haven't stopped until like probably my senior year of high school, a little bit after that. But I've been to the area. I actually haven't been in the town of Yorktown. We went to some conservation park on the York River for our Yorktown Day.
York River State Park.
That would be it. And then we did the Jamestown settlement as we did, and then we also did Colonial Williamsburg. So this was my first time properly seeing Yorktown, like the redoubts and Battery 12, number one. I'm going to start with that because that was pretty darn cool to see, man. Like, most of you probably have no idea what I'm talking about, and that's okay because it is off the beaten path for sure. After a lengthy trek and some, what we call them, wait a minute vines.
Yeah.
There was no shortage of those. We get to this really, really cool Civil War earthwork. And then we get to see like Wormley Creek or Wormley Pond. And first of all, Tim even coined it a proper ravine. That was a very steep ravine that we were up on, some bluffs almost. And I'm not a big fan of heights. So I was like, ooh, okay, we're a ways up. And I'm not used to seeing all this stuff. So, of course, I'm trying to get myself in the mindset of being in the Revolutionary War. And then I guess we're jumping like in between time eras here. I'm going to Civil War, then back to Revolutionary War, then Civil War again, which is okay.
I warned you.
You did. And I took heed of that warning. And we even had to take a second to sit down and admire Battery 12, which is really cool because, again, it is just very, very well preserved work because barely anyone has ever even seen that work. So it hasn't had a lot of foot traffic back to it. And you could tell, too, by some of just the old bottles that were laying around the area on the way there. I mean, they look like they had to have been from the early, 40s, 50s, maybe even older than that.
Maybe 60s, no later, really.
So that was cool to see that even just something like that, it shows you that
But
this area.
those battles were almost half a mile away. So
Mm-hmm.
So
So it just
anyway,
shows you. Yes.
as a complete novice, what was the importance of Yorktown to the British
Ooh, Tim.
at the time of the Revolution, Tim?
That is a Tim
to
question.
well, I guess you got to go back. I mean, Yorktown was kind of past its heyday. Come the Revolutionary War, the town was founded in 1691. As they're trying to get ports for Virginia colony, which is starting to expand up towards like Fredericksburg and the Northern Neck and all that stuff. But they're looking for deep water ports that will allow them to, bring ships and offload, supplies and also to get the crops out, tobacco, what have you. So Yorktown was among the first. It later became like a merchant town, a place to collect taxes. Became the seat, obviously, of York County. But come the Revolution, what happened was you kind of, to me, simplistic, right? The first 2 years or 3 years of Revolutionary War, it starts to, Washington takes Boston. Then the Brits come back. They take New York, force Washington all the way across New Jersey, across the Delaware into Pennsylvania. Washington claps back, basically, takes Trenton, fights at Second Trenton or the Battle of Assunpink Creek, fights at Princeton, and basically regains some momentum. The next year, the British under Lord Howe, William Howe, or not Lord Howe, William Howe, General William Howe. His brother was the Lord. They launched a campaign on Philadelphia, defeat Washington at the Brandywine, at Germantown. Then you have Valley Forge. The Howe brothers decide that they're not going to hold Philadelphia another year. They withdraw. The Americans are better trained. They fight at Monmouth, and that's in 1777, so 2 full years into the war. And it turns out, the British eventually get back to New York, and then nothing happens. And in 1780, so nearly 3 years goes by with relatively little skirmishing. I mean, and this is all this stuff, other things happened. The British General Burgoyne comes down from Quebec trying to link up and sever the northern colonies. He loses at Saratoga, which brings the French into the war. They recognize the United States, and they agreed to provide funds, ultimately a fleet and an army.
I am Kojak, yes, thank you.
So, bottom line, the northern colonies aren't producing results, so the British believe that they're going to have better success in the South. So they move down, they take Savannah, they take Charleston. Then the new commander-in-chief, Henry Clinton, he heads back to New York, leaves Lord Cornwallis with his army in Charleston, and he starts to move through the South. They have diverging efforts. They'll occasionally send cavalry out to raid. They defeat the Continental Army rather decisively at a place called Camden. And after that, the commanding general, General Gates, who had won Saratoga, ironically, which was a turning point. He was just awful in the South. He gets replaced by Nathaniel Greene, who's one of Washington's favorites. And, they pursue each other. The British suffer a couple key losses at Cowpens, which is a morale boost for the Continentals and affects the British cavalry pretty substantially, or Tarleton's Legion, it was called. Loyalist force loses a place called Kings Mountain. So morale is kind of shifting. And then they fight at a place called Guilford Courthouse in early late 1780. And it is a Pyrrhic victory. The British win. Nathaniel Greene, withdraws, but he isn't routed. And the casualties, especially among the elite brigade of guards, are rather substantial. After that, Cornwallis falls back to Wilmington and then decides he's going to basically try to get up to New York. He's going to head up into Virginia, the meantime, Greene moves south and basically reverses all the gains that the British made in the South. So Cornwallis is up in Virginia and chasing the Marquis de Lafayette, and he decides he's going to need to, find a deep. Clinton says, "Okay, I'm going to bring you up here, find a deep water port." So he was going to go. He recommended they go to like the Hampton Roads area, Norfolk, Fort Monroe. What's now Fort Monroe.
Mm-hmm.
And at the tip of the peninsula, but Cornwallis says that's not defensible, so he chooses to go to Yorktown. And so that's why the British end up there, is purely because at some point Cornwallis is anticipating either significant reinforcements or being evacuated.
And they dig in, and that's when it becomes a siege, is it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, before they go there, they actually fight a battle against Lafayette. And I showed Tyler the location, which ironically is the exact location of his 4-H camp when he was a kid. So
and you said you were stung by a bee there, right?
I got stung by a bee there as a kid. So
hey, I stepped on broken glass in the York, or was it the James? It had to be the James. Yeah, I had my foot got all cut up, so out there.
So yeah, then the British dig in, they build outer works, they build an inner defensive line. So most of the earthworks, the British earthworks that you see are, they've been enhanced by Confederates first, and then some rehabilitation afterwards by CCC. But by and large, those earthworks are proper, and they're all on the proper location.
And are they pretty well preserved, the works there at Yorktown?
Well, that's the funny thing you got to understand. So the only earthwork from the era that has never been improved, touched, is what they call the Untouched Redoubt. So it's
I'm going to get the picture of you and I standing on that in this chat in a second. Yep. So
we've done that. Almost all of the other earthworks, all of the French, all of the Americans, both redoubts are reconstructions. 1930s Civilian Conservation Corps era. The British inner defensive line, the townspeople tried to get rid of them, but they couldn't. And then the Confederates built up and enhanced them. And by and large, they're the same earthworks. They've just been built up since. They were a little bit smaller than what they are now during the war. I mean, they weren't dealing with rifled parrots or anything. They were dealing with 12-pound, and that if you see a picture, that's the work behind us, which is still, it's okay. I mean, it's probably from the inside, if you were standing inside, it's probably shoulder height. So it's probably eroded 8 inches since the war, but largely the forest has kept that one. But the problem with that one is when, so I guess to bring the story up to siege, word filters back to Washington, and, a series of different people, Rochambeau, the French commander in North America, or land commander, some of Washington's generals are like, hey, we're not doing anything here around New York. Morale's awful. We have this opportunity. And they convince Washington to move his entire army, which they do by ruse. They escape. They get out of New York. In reality, they're the ones besieging New York, but they can't take it. They can't block off the harbor because of the power of the Royal Navy, so it isn't really a siege.
Right.
But they move, 7,000 French, 5,500 Continentals down to Yorktown or to the peninsula, and then they head to Yorktown. When Cornwallis hears that the army is approaching, right before, he abandons his outer works. So the Untouched Redoubt, all except 3. He keeps redoubts 9 and 10, which is on his eastern side of Yorktown, within sight of the main fortifications, and then one on the other side of what's known as Yorktown Creek on his west flank, which is held by the 23rd Regiment of Foot, which is the Royal Welsh Fusiliers. Right across the street from that today is the American Revolution Museum at Yorktown, which is a living history museum.
And Tim,
So-
I'm putting up some of the pictures you took now of the battery 9 and 10.
Yeah, if you want to go
10
back to 9, I can show you because 9 is very.
This one here, or the second
Yep,
one?
that right
two.
there.
Okay, first one.
Yep. This is readout 9, and the Fusiliers readout will look just like this one. So you've got the phrases or phrasey, whatever they call it, the sticks there. Depth perception on a photo. That's a ditch right in front of it.
Mm-hmm.
The earthwork would have held 120 men from a series of different British units. I can actually pull it up here.
And if you have any pictures you specifically want me to send, just Facebook message me those, and I can throw them on our restream too.
Sure.
He took a really good one that I really, really like that shows, because when he told me that there were 120 men in readout 9, I was just blown away because it isn't a large readout at all. I mean, it is
a bit tight.
Show them the inside one, that other photo that has the opening.
Yeah, that one.
So that's from the inside of readout 9 looking back. If you look, you can see on the back side, on the left in the rear, that's the visitor center, and that's the British inner defenses. The reason that these fortifications ultimately had to be taken was because, they stood right atop what was plotted to be the Allied second siege line. And from there, even with 18th century artillery, they're at point blank range. So that really sealed the deal.
Making some more room here for more photos.
I mean, they get bombarded at one point, don't they, by the...
they receive over 10,000 shells during the course of the...
Good Lord.
Well, these poor... are the people, inhabitants of not Jamestown, sorry, Yorktown stuck in the town, or have they fled?
Some have fled, some are there. Some take shelter in some caves beneath, very Vicksburg-esque.
And again, they don't want the British there. Do they want the British there, or are they against it?
Most of Yorktown, the governor of Virginia at the time is a guy named Thomas Nelson, and he is a patriot. He actually directs fire on his own house. So it's
Jeez.
But his missus was
put it right through the kitchen, sir.
Yeah, I've just had that kitchen fitted.
Yeah, right.
There's a ball stuck in the roof now. Yeah,
there's some cannonballs in some of the.
Another
signifying where shells would have. That was one thing we got to have this really cool coffee.
But obviously, the town backs onto the York River. So did the British have the backup of the Royal Navy ships to fire?
They had a couple. So the issue was that right before the Continental Army and the French get there, is a relief convoy does sail under Admiral Graves, but they make contact with the French fleet that's come up from Bermuda, from the Caribbean, under Admiral de Grasse, right at the entrance of the Chesapeake Bay, and they defeat the British. They have some ships that are there. The problem is there aren't that many. They have a 44 gun frigate that eventually does get set on fire. I posted some photos today about that.
Mm-hmm.
That ship gets hit.
So they can't really respond because they've got to deal with the French Navy.
Well, the French Navy actually doesn't stay very long.
Okay.
I think they may be there through the siege, but that's why Washington's trying to get on with it. Because they want to get the French have their own priorities. They're not helping the Americans. To be honest, it's probably more so a case of the French are helping the Americans because it suits French interests, and it certainly isn't out of the kindness of their hearts.
It's the two superpowers of the time trying to outdo each other, isn't it?
Right.
I think that sums it up rather well.
So where is this? So I saw these pictures. Yeah. So where is this? Is this indoors?
It is. It's in the
That's
Yorktown
indoors.
mock-up.
Yeah.
That is a 1/4 replica of a ship called the HMS Chiron, 44-gun frigate. The cannons that are inside the ship are original. They're pulled off, pulled out of York, like this one in 1930. So quite remarkable. I mean, the ship got set on fire. It was closer to the Yorktown side of the river. It got on fire, and they were trying to get away from the gunfire, and ended up going fully alight on the other side of York, what we call the Gloucester side, and sinking there.
Can you imagine how scary that is, being inside with all those cannons going off and then being shot at the same time? God.
All right. Tim, you don't have a way to Facebook message me these, do you? Just because we're on the computer. I don't know how to quickly get them off my phone to where they can.
Okay, yeah, I'll try.
Thank you. If not, I can just email them myself real quick. Just send me whatever you want.
So that actual cannon there was pulled up from the river, is that right?
1930s?
Yep.
If I have that right. Yep,
in the 1930s.
So, Darren, if you look at the picture I just put up, you'll be able to see them actually in the flag there. They have
that's pretty cool, yeah.
Isn't it?
And I mean, you can see on the actual cannon itself that it'd been underwater for some time.
Mm-hmm. Let me send these two to my email real quick. Boom, boom. Okay, sent those. And if you have any others, I'll just email them to myself. That's working pretty easy, actually.
I got it.
And so Yorktown today, is it a big town or is it still quite small?
No, it's still quite small. I mean, the county is big. There's a lot of, a lot of growth in the area due to military bases there. I mean, we have Norfolk Naval Base, which is the largest naval base in the world there. We have Langley Air Force Base, Fort Eustis, Oceana Naval Air Station. There's a Coast Guard base in Yorktown. But the town itself has retained pretty much all of its character.
So you've still got the original, a lot of the original buildings. And
Sandra over on YouTube, thank you for joining in from Michigan. Wow. Trying to think if we have a Michigan viewer or not. You might be our first Michigan viewer.
Good evening.
Yeah, good evening. Welcome to the Unfiltered Historian.
I'm being taught how the British got their ass whooped at Yorktown tonight.
I wouldn't say the intent isn't that actually.
No, I'm only joking.
No, that's my intent.
I'm enjoying it. It's good to learn something about it because
I'm learning as we go tonight too because I'm still really raw.
I think I'm definitely it spikes my interest.
There we go. And here, Tim, do you want me to show those pictures now? Do you send me on text because I have them up on Restream now?
Yeah, give me a second.
Take your time, brother.
So, Tyler, what was it like for you for the first time? Was it a little bit like me at, Fredericksburg?
Oh, it was identical.
Coming there for the first time and seeing all that stuff.
It was absolutely like that.
And also, you've got a really good historian that literally knows every little corner and every little detail of that.
And on that battlefield, you couldn't be truer, man. He knew.
So, he was in safe hands.
I knew if I had any questions, I knew I was fielding them to the right person. That battlefield hit me some type of way, if you will. I didn't expect to be blown away by the battlefield at all. I didn't really go in thinking that I was going to have this want to know more, and especially to dive in as far as I'm about to into the Revolution. I asked him, I can't remember how long we were into the trip. I think we were literally leaving Battery 12. We emerged from the woods and we were on our way to the car to go to the visitor center. I looked at him and I was like, how much you want to bet that I'm going to be on a Rev War kick for quite a while? He was like, I'd put $1,000 on it. Well, we got to keep our money because sitting here looking at an ever-growing pile.
You ended up accidentally tripped into a bookshop again.
He did.
I do that a lot. I'll take a quick minute to plug the two Yorktown.
I mean, he gets personal text messages from the lady down at the bookstore in Fredericksburg.
No, that was in person. in
Yeah.
person
Oh,
too
in
about
person.
about
I've
this
got your
your favorite
latest
book.
20 books in, Tyler.
Yep. Hey, look at the bookmark in the book too.
Yeah, well, I've got plenty of those.
I
Thanks.
know you do. Well, the two that I picked up, one is on Yorktown, the other isn't, because you know me, I love my ships, I love my boats.
Yeah.
Had to get something, but the first one is one that I'm really excited to be diving into, and that is The Guns of Independence: The Siege of Yorktown, 1781, written by Jerome A. Green, and the second from the Yorktown Visitor Center was The Struggle for Sea Power, all about my naval ships.
Oh, no, Noel's made a really good point. What you told me about earlier, Tyler.
1 second. Let's see what he said. No, hey, buddy. He says, Darren's a true friend to endure all this fall 17. I love it. Wasn't there an engagement at or Sally from Jamestown during Bacon's Rebellion? Yes, there was indeed. There was
something to do with the
Green,
English Civil War.
Around Green Spring, yes. So Tim took me on the way out to Jamestown. I'm so glad we stopped there. On our way out of Jamestown, we stopped at this little pull-off for the Battle of Green Spring, if I'm not mistaken.
He's talking Bacon's Rebellion.
There was, yeah, but that same location was where they had the Bacon's Rebellion site.
Okay, well,
At Jamestown and a little bit above, because there was somebody living, if I'm not mistaken, at the. I'll have to quickly go through my phone real quick. I have the plaque to talk about that too. I think I took a picture of that. But yeah, no, Noel, you'd be right. Absolutely, Jamestown and Bacon's Rebellion are definitely tied together, and that's one thing Darren and I were talking about earlier is the connection between the English Civil War and Bacon's Rebellion, which is really, really cool in my mind. And I do have a Oxford University book on Bacon's Rebellion, so I'm very unknowledgeable on Bacon's Rebellion at the moment, but you guys give me a few weeks and I'm pretty sure I'll be able to talk.
What happens, that it was actually basically the issue actually stemmed from colonial issues with the colonial policy towards the Native Americans. Bacon and others thought that the governor was not being aggressive enough or harsh enough. And Bacon basically demanded, a series of laws, the House of Burgesses, which at the time was at Jamestown, demanded a reduction in the governor's powers and restored the right to vote to people who were to landless free people.
Mm-hmm.
But in the aftermath of those laws passing, Bacon arrived at Jamestown with several hundred, 500, something like that, of his followers to basically demand the creation of a militia to engage in a campaign against Native Americans. Governor basically said, no, that's Governor Berkeley. And, at one point, the governor opens his shirt and bares his breast to be like, fine, shoot me. And Bacon threatened to do it. And basically, they'd seen that they couldn't get the governor to act. They forced the House of Burgesses to do it. So, yes, it was a raid, kind of, but it wasn't.
I don't know about you, but keep talking about bacon. I fancy a bacon sandwich now.
You know what? That does sound really good.
Oh, it's
too. Yeah, it does.
It does sound good, doesn't it? Maybe we should go to the Battlefield Caf for it.
Now we're time hopping again.
Mm-hmm. Sorry.
Y'all are going to confuse me. Stonewall Jackson's going to sail on, the U.S. Constitution.
But yeah, anyway, going back to...
Nope. Yeah, Yorktown.
Yorktown, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Tim, one question I do have for you about Yorktown. Now, we talked a little bit about this, but I'd like to hear your take on too. Readout 9 and 10. Okay. So if I have it correctly, 9 is attacked by the French, 10 is attacked by the Continental Army.
Correct.
Cool. You mentioned that there are about 120 men in Battery 9. How many men thereabouts were in Battery 10? Is it similar? Are we looking at about 120 men in Battery 10?
Do you have the photo that shows the distance between the two?
Absolutely, I do. Cool.
Okay, so you can see the recreated there in the distance. You can kind of see the logs sticking out there at the tree line. Problem with this is that's both of these are reconstructions. That is a reconstruction that's a good 100 yards or 150 feet away from what it was. Everywhere that the redoubt is, the cliff basically has fallen away. It fell away probably around Civil War time. Mm-hmm. So that cliff face, so the redoubt and the ground that Alexander Hamilton and the Americans crossed over in the assault is gone. It's in the river. So let's preface with that. So Redoubt 9 was held by 120 to 140 British soldiers from a variety of regiments: the 71st Regiment of Foot, Fraser's Highlanders, the 33rd Regiment of Foot, 43rd, 80th, and some Hessians and Prussians. Sorry, not Prussians, Hessian soldiers. Mm-hmm. The Redoubt 10 was smaller. It was so Redoubt 9 is kind of shaped like a pentagon. Redoubt 10 is shaped like a U, or like a kind of like a square with an open back end. So it held just 70 men. So the Americans technically had a easier time of it, aside from the fact that they're moving, a greater distance. Do you have the one from atop the parapet? Did I send you that one?
This one?
Nope.
This one? No, hold on. I think I do, actually. It would be this one.
Yes. Okay, so this is actually from the top, or just below the top of Redoubt 9. So the French attacked this with a regiment called the it's from a guy named de Viomenil, I think is his last name. I'm not French, so I can't pronounce it. But the regiments DuPont and a couple others take place. But they basically attack. If you look at that tree line in the distance to the right of the flagpole, they come up there, and Tyler could attest to this. Basically, they enter a depression, and that allows them to move unseen. And they're attacking at night. Both the 400 French attacking and the 400 Americans attacking off to their right at number 10 are advancing with unloaded muskets with fixed bayonets. They send pioneers forward. They cut through the abattis. And during the cutting of the abattis, you can't not make noise. Right. The British spot, and they start firing on the Americans and French. And, Redoubt 9 is more heavily defended. The French suffer more casualties than the Americans do, taking number 10. And regardless of losses on that one, both attacks were incredibly aggressive. They were audacious and heroic. I mean, that kind of makes Alexander Hamilton's reputation in the war, even though he'd been involved in it from near the beginning.
I was happy to hear about Alexander Hamilton when we were down there, because I learned a lot about him, especially at Yorktown. I didn't realize the significance he had.
So what sort of numbers are we talking, army-wise?
Well, the British have 8,000 when Cornwallis pulls into the defenses. He has to defend both Yorktown and Gloucester, so he's got about 5,500 sitting in Yorktown. A good number of the rest are up in Gloucester. Some were sent off earlier, so he's still sitting bigger than either the Americans or the French individually. The total Allied army numbers about 13,000. And I sent Tyler some of the artillery pictures. Can you pull some of those up?
Oh, of course.
So the French, this is from the Grand American Battery. So now the Grand American Battery was basically set up to the east of Battery 9, of Redoubt 9 when it's taken. And they use, any guns they can. They use, naval guns like you see here. They'll use mortars. I think we have some pictures of mortars somewhere else.
Wow, look at that.
Mm-hmm.
So this one, very interesting. That's an even bigger one. That's in what was called the Yep, that's in what was called the Grand French Battery, which was on the first Allied siege line. And it's interesting on that one because there's a part that's clearly broke off.
Yeah.
What they called the dolphins. In that,
Let me go back to the first because I think that has one, right? Yeah.
Yeah, those handles are the dolphins. The French.
So what are they firing out of these?
Well, this is the term bombs, is what they call them.
Okay.
Just big, basically shells. So hollow shells. And the Hessian writing after the battle was basically like, we're glad Cornwallis surrendered when he did. The French were attacking with, we're going to attack with their grenadiers. That was the rumor. But basically said we'd been shelled by 8,000 bombs. I don't know that number is accurate, or if I don't think I'm misquoting, but
it's raining lead.
It's a lot. I mean, it takes a lot to load that thing. So if you want to bring that,
this one or the second,
either. So basically, you have to you set powder in the base of the bowl, and then you put a wadding over top of it. Then you put the bomb or the shell in it, and then you hold it in place with wooden wedges that you hammer into around the ball. Mm-hmm. And then when you fire it, you can see a touch hole there at the bottom, kind of where the like knob would be. When you fire it, the wedges allow the fire to wrap around the base because the fuse basically is at the top, and it's a wooden fuse just with powder inside of another type of detonator or detonation combination of powders. In the top of it. So fire wraps around and it hits that as it's being expelled out the bore. And they had the complicated tables showing the elevation. And this thing's loaded because you'll actually tilt it up completely upright as you're loading it. And then you'll put a device over front to handle the angles. So first you have to make sure you're level, but then the device will measure your angles, and then you'll go back to your tables to see what angle equals what range based on the powder you used. So rather intricate. And to be honest, come Civil War, the big siege mortars like what Battery 12 were supposed to be used at Battery 12 or the Dictator at Petersburg, really actually doesn't function all that differently from these little Revolutionary War era mortars. But like when you hear in that era, from our own national anthem, the bombs bursting in air, they're referring to mortar bombs that are coming out of a device like that.
Wow.
Very interesting indeed. I have a few more artillery pictures too that you sent. I have this one here. Is this one of the ones you wanted to have me show as well?
Yeah, I mean, just shows the different types. You have a gun there in the background. Same type of, that's a 12-pound howitzer or 12-pound cannon or gun cannon, 12-pound gun. And then you'd have a 12-pound howitzer, which is the one in the foreground. It looks kind of like a mortar.
Yeah,
but it isn't. It's designed to fire high angle. It fires shells. Some would call it like carcass shots or whatever that would be more incendiary. So different shells for different things. The gun's going to batter against the fortification itself. The mortars and the howitzers are designed to go over the fortifications. They're not, the guns may try to destroy the fortifications, but the howitzers and the mortars are designed to be more anti-personnel, to target the headquarters, to hit, the governor's house or what have you.
Yeah, that's awesome. So yeah, we have a lot of cool stuff.
So you were saying about the 2 charges that they do during the night. So do the Allied forces break through into the redoubts?
Yeah, they take both.
Sorry, Darren, I didn't mean to smile at you like that.
And so then, what happens then? Do they retreat back to Yorktown?
Well, some escape from the redoubts, but the majority are captured or killed or killed at the redoubts.
Like you said, it's like hand-to-hand.
It's hand-to-hand. Remember, the Americans and French are advancing without loaded weapons, so you're talking bayonet.
Vicious fighting there then. And is that uncommon during the Revolutionary War? Is this type of charge something that's seen really kind of a unique aspect of Yorktown, or is this something that's kind of widespread throughout the entire Rev War?
Well, bayonet charges are a decisive aspect of British tactics, which means they're a decisive element of American tactics, except for the fact that for a long time in the war, the Americans didn't have them. So, in an ideal action, the British would, they'd advance to within accurate musket range. You're talking 100 yards on in, maybe up to 50, deliver a few volleys, and then charge home with the bayonet, and the Americans would retreat. There aren't many sieges like this. I mean, yes, the Americans lead bayonet assaults at Stony Point in New York. They lead bayonet assaults against the redoubts at Yorktown. But
this is a really cool question.
I mean, that's an opinion question.
Yeah.
That's kind of akin to saying, do you give Meade or Grant the credit for Appomattox? I mean, Meade commands the army, or the most significant portion of that army, while Grant's overall in charge of the thing, and he's there on the scene. Washington commands all the forces at Yorktown. He has to say, if Washington says, no, we're not going to Yorktown, they're not going to Yorktown, regardless of what Rochambeau wants.
And they almost didn't, right? They almost stayed in New York.
Yeah, I mean, conversely, the French have more troops. They have 7,000. The Americans have 5,500 Continentals. I think with militia, the Americans are bigger. I think at that point, it brings them up to 8,000. But a lot of people try to say, and it's almost always like a justification to say, well, you're not your country without the French. And there's an element of truth to that. But there's also a fact that there wasn't a French soldier there pinning Washington into Yorktown. It was Americans under Wayne and Lafayette, at Green Spring, and then withdrawing back to the North Anna River, actually, and then back down to Yorktown. There wasn't a Frenchman at Guilford Courthouse that turned out to be the Pyrrhic victory that ended Cornwallis's campaign, basically in the Carolinas. There wasn't a French soldier at Kings Mountain or Cowpens, or during Greene's campaign against 96 and other successful ventures in the South. So, yes and no. It is too simplistic to say, oh, America isn't America without French help. It's partially true, but it doesn't tell the whole story or even close to it.
Awesome. And another kind of a thing I have for you too is, for someone that is just wanting to learn about Yorktown, is it proper to maybe study Guilford Courthouse before we go to Yorktown? Because I know that
as long as you can grasp that story quickly, you don't need an in-depth study of Guilford Courthouse. But I think you could do worse than to study it. And the tactics are really interesting.
Yeah.
The British, they a lot of different people say, they were the most powerful army in the world. They were definitely the most powerful navy in the world.
Right.
It is questionable, and there is a lot of academic debate about the quality of their army. That being said, they were definitely professional. They were definitely competent. They were capable of winning major battles, during the 7 Years' War, here in North America and in Europe simultaneously. So and during what we call the French and Indian War, they suffered greatly for lack of light infantry tactics. Come the revolution, they're by and large fighting in what's considered open order. What we might call skirmish formation. So they're nearly an arm or two arms width apart between the files. It's ironic that less than 80 years later, Civil War armies are fighting shoulder to shoulder with weapons that are 4 to 5 times more accurate than what they had during the Revolution. So one could say that tactics in a way devolved after the Revolutionary War. Maybe that, and a lot of recent studies have gone into that. A good book written by a British historian who's fascinated with the American Revolution is called With Zeal and with Bayonets Only. Matthew Spring, I think, is the author's name. When it comes to Revolutionary War tactics and how an 18th century army fought, particularly in North America.
You sent me that book too, didn't you? And
yes, I cannot recommend that one enough. Another good one for those interested, an American citizen named Don Haggist has done a lot of work on the British experience in the American Revolutionary War. One book is British Soldiers, American War. And it has a lot of first-person accounts, and he works a lot of first-person accounts into it, and he basically tells the experience of the war from the perspective of a series of British soldiers. And he's done other books, Heroic Volunteers, I think is the name of another one. Is that right? Noble Volunteers. Sorry. And that's very good. And then, Rick Atkinson, who did the Liberation trilogy of World War II, he's now started on a Revolutionary War trilogy.
I have wondered if the British are coming.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I've got that on the shelf too. It's in the lineup of the plethora of Revolutionary War recommendations that mostly came from you, my friend. Starting with...
Yeah, I think, Nathan, in reference to your question, Lafayette's role before the battle, Yorktown was the culmination of a campaign that was in progress well before Washington started to move down from New York. You had at one point Benedict Arnold as part of the continental efforts or the British efforts in Virginia. Benedict Arnold had turned his coat earlier that year, came down, led a loyalist force against Richmond, all while Cornwallis has finally moved up from Wilmington. Cornwallis gets on to the, chases up to North Anna, back down the peninsula, then kind of back up towards Richmond again. And at some point, the Battle of Green Spring occurs there, which is a fight led by the Marquis de Lafayette. His chief subordinate under him was the Anthony Wayne. We call him Mad Anthony. He led basically the light infantry element of the Continental Army. Lafayette had probably the best American division, which is why he was sent down here by Washington. And for those who aren't aware, the Marquis de Lafayette was, basically became a surrogate son to Washington. After he goes back to France and, Lafayette supports the revolution, despite the fact that he's, a marquis and a nobleman. And when they seize the Bastille, they send the key to the Bastille. He gets it and he sends it to Washington, basically calling it a symbol of liberty, and it should belong with the father of liberty, referring to Washington. So it's very interesting.
Awesome. Noel Harrison says, always found it fascinating that French troops stayed in that area during winter after the siege. I vaguely recall reading that they fortified West Point, Virginia during this period.
I think they did, but they've been making a bigger deal about the Washington-Rochambeau route over the last 15 years. It's now a National Historic Trail stretching all the way from Connecticut, I believe, down to Yorktown. And, I live right off of it. As we were driving down there, I mentioned there's a relatively large, they call it a plantation nearby called Belvedere. It's a colonial plantation. Yes, that's one of the many places Washington dined elsewhere. They can legitimately say George Washington slept here at this place. But also during the campaign, there were French elements camped on this plantation. So the histories here, it sometimes gets overwhelmed by the Civil War history. But it's really interesting how much colonial revolutionary history is in this area, in Fredericksburg. Fredericksburg contributed a disproportionate number of men out to the Virginia regiments. One who later became a mayor of Fredericksburg. They recently rededicated, Sons of the American Revolution marker to him in one of our cemeteries, in the Masonic Cemetery up by Fredericksburg. I think I pointed that out to Darren when he was here.
Yeah,
you did.
Remember that? Yeah.
So,
and I think one of the things I remember from my tenure as an intern at the NPS here in Fredericksburg was that the Marquis de Lafayette also stayed at Elwood at one point, or on the grounds, sort of in that area. I think maybe it was exactly Wilderness Tavern.
Yeah.
But somewhere in that vicinity, in what would later be known as the Battle of the Wilderness for all my Civil War folks here, that we have Marquis de Lafayette actually staying in the wilderness at one point. Mm-hmm. It's pretty awesome, isn't it, Darren?
It is. And all I can think of now is I'm going and buying a book on the Revolution.
Tim, you just converted too. In less than a weekend.
In actual fact, I've got 2 tokens sitting in my Audible account right now.
Uh-oh. All
Which
right, so
book are you buying, Darren? I'm sorry.
Let Tim recommend you the Revolution books if you're getting any of them. Because we listened to one that I have a book, I have the hardcover or the paperback of that I'm supposed to be reading. Probably should read that before I read the Yorktown one, but it's called Almost a Miracle by John Ferling. Mm-hmm. That if I could recommend you, and I haven't read it yet, but just from the opening, Tim let me sit through it, I was like, okay, I'm hooked. It's a book that will hook you for sure, just from reading the beginning of it.
I mean, and they focus on the experience of a British officer to begin with. They're during the pursuit of some rebels on Long Island, so it's pretty good. Yeah, Almost a Miracle is probably my favorite overall book on covering the war. Tactical study with zeal and with bayonets only. British Soldiers, American War is probably my favorite account that gets down to soldier level. A lot of people talk like the Diary of Joseph Plum Martin and yada, whatever. And that's good, but
it is.
I like the fact that British Soldiers, American War has multiple perspectives. One guy who ends up sympathizing with the American cause after being here for a while. I think he was actually an Irish guy, so he probably had a little bit of resentment in him to begin with.
Go Irish.
But oh, that's cool.
That is cool. You see that, Darren?
Wow.
I had an uncle, Irish uncle. As far as best I can tell, he served in India as well. I mean, the irony is I am not in the Sons of American Revolution. I was telling Tyler, I've got like 20 first or second cousins that served in these 2 continental units called the 1st and 2nd Canadian Regiments. But if I had to guess, and it would not surprise me in the least if I find a direct ancestor served in the Revolution, it was likely they served in a British unit, because Ireland wasn't a separate country. The British could recruit freely throughout the entire island,
Well, yeah, that during the English Civil War, it's part of Britain,
Yep, and it's part of Britain.
It's part of It's
part of Britain until the 20th
Britain,
century.
Yeah, exactly.
So, and the Irish were always relatively poor around that period, so it didn't take a lot of. I suspect most Irish people have some connection, if not direct collateral, to someone who served in the British Army pretty much at any period. At the Revolution, maybe not as much because they were still restrictive on Catholics, but that doesn't mean that Catholics didn't enlist. They just wouldn't be able to practice. Come Napoleon time, the British don't care. At that point, the British rank and file, it's like 75. It's like 75% of the British Army is Irish come the heart of the Napoleonic Wars. Just because manpower, they can't get them.
Yeah.
And Noel, I have that wall gun. I just took the picture off the link you sent us to show everybody what you were referring to there.
Wow.
That's really cool. I didn't know that. Rev War wall gun made at the ironworks between. I'm sorry, I didn't mean British. I meant Rev War. Rev War wall gun made at the ironworks between Falmouth and future site of I-95 bridge over the Rappahannock. That is awesome.
There's,
now, can I ask what a wall gun is? Because, Noel, quite frankly, I'm not even remotely familiar with what a wall gun is. And Tim, are you?
If I'm not mistaken, let me double check, make sure so I don't make a fool of myself.
No, you wouldn't make a fool of yourself.
My understanding is if you pulled that up, you're looking at they're rather basically they're massive guns. That peg would be put into basically a device that would steady the weapon, because you're talking rather massive. You are talking rather massive caliber. They are designed to break the advance of enemy troops. It was the scaled up version, and that's saying something because the bores on the Brown Bess are 75 caliber, and firing a 68 caliber bullet. That's 9 caliber bigger than a Civil War weapon. I mean,
I've seen examples of hang type cannon type things are similar to this during the English Civil War, like that. And again, they would be on a stand, very similar.
So you have some serious accuracy with this in comparison to the other weapons that you're using.
No, it's still a smoothbore weapon. It's going to have all the same problems that every other smoothbore has. The round is going to be more accurate at shorter distances, lose accuracy as you go along. Because the way it works, the ball is basically bound, like I mentioned, it's in the Brown Bess, it's a 75 caliber bore, but they're firing a 69 caliber ball. So it basically drops in. That's where the whole concept of being able to tap load a weapon, basically by slamming the butt down, hoping the ball drops further, which initially is going to work out fine. But you fire a few shots, the barrel starts to get fouled. And then ironically, I've heard your accuracy actually goes up.
Okay.
A little bit because it gets tight. It's a tighter fit. But regardless, in principle, so this ball is barely sitting in the barrel. You're kind of keeping it elevated up, or you don't want to elevate it down too much because then the ball can literally roll out. That's why
problematic.
That's why they sometimes kept the ball in the paper and rammed the paper down with it, just for extra wadding. But regardless, the principle is the same. It really doesn't matter if you're elevated high, the ball's going to bounce down, and hey, maybe it hits right there at the end as it exits, and then it's on a downward trajectory. But it's all going to depend on where the ball bounces inside that barrel last. Which is why you need large, massive men delivering fire towards the enemy. It's why in the British Army and the commands, basically commands to fire in the British Army and in the Continental Army, really up until von Steuben. You have make ready, and that's when you cock the weapon, and then you present. You leveled the muskets in the general direction. Yes, you're going to try to sight down the barrel, but these weapons, the brown bass, etc., don't even have sights. They may have a front sight put on top that has been jerry-rigged or maybe manufactured, but no rear sight. But the goal is get it pointed basically level at the enemy, and then you fire. The Americans will adjust the commands slightly. You'll have make ready, take aim, and fire. But in principle, they're not doing anything different. The British,
because of the inaccuracy of these weapons, is that why they do the shoulder to shoulder?
Generally speaking, yes.
What did you tell me yesterday at Battery 9? There was we weren't shoulder length apart. What do we call it again? Because you mentioned something really unique in that, very interesting.
So this is where I recommend that one book with Zeal and with Bayonets Only, because I learned it from him.
Okay.
So you have close order, which is basically shoulder to shoulder. You'll have order, which is basically an arm apart. Then you'll have extended order, which is 2 arms apart. They're fighting in open order, so 1 arm apart or maybe 2 arms, whichever. So there is space between the ranks. It is not quite shoulder to shoulder. And in large part, that's due to the American terrain. It's we're heavily forested country. Even today, I mean, you've been here. We have lots of trees everywhere. It's difficult to move. The terrain here is very undulating. Not a lot of flat fields. The British Army's experience in Europe in the rest of the 18th century is, flat land like in Holland, right? We don't have that here. So the shoulder isn't going to work. And they suffer for it during the French and Indian War. And that's where they actually, William Howe pushes for light infantry tactics as a result of his French and Indian War experience. And he then becomes commander-in-chief in North America for a while, and that filters down. So while the light infantry still exists and they're still out in front, they're then maybe fighting in extended order, so even further apart, whereas the infantry's, an arm's length apart. So now it's even harder to hit, to inflict large numbers of casualties. And in the Revolution, compared to Civil War, casualty rates are relatively low. But then again, armies.
Why do we go back? Why do you go back to that? Well, why do you change to those tactics of shoulder to shoulder during the American Civil War?
What was Napoleon doing?
Napoleon.
I think the answer is Napoleon. And I was making an interesting observation. It's unfortunate that American officers come the antebellum era, after, Winfield Scott, though not a West Pointer and an associate who did associate with Revolutionary War officers, he very much became a Francophile, and the West Point faculty, Mahan, they very much adopted Napoleonic tactics, and that's what they taught during the one class in the senior year that West Point cadets got was Napoleonic tactics. And with the smoothbore, and keep in mind, Waterloo's fought in Belgium, and more than any other battle, what are they studying? Waterloo. There are others, Austerlitz, and they're familiar with it, but the terrain is different and more receptive to that. So, plus, I mean, realistically, talking Civil War tactics, the technological advancement is only half of the reason why they fought the way they did. The other half is communication. How do you exercise command and control over forces the size you do even in World War One, they're still somewhat bunched up.
Yeah, they are. They're still going.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
not shoulder to shoulder anymore, but
yeah, I know what you mean.
you're not as spread out.
You're
come
doing
World
that
War,
full frontal attack.
come World War II, when you have radios and wireless devices that are, then you start to see, companies take up positions the size of that used to be held by Civil War brigades at times, hilltops, outside of not Metz, Aachen. First Infantry Division. There's a company very famous there, held like a area the size, that a Civil War brigade, no joke, would have held the size terrain that this company held in World War II. So.
And Noel brought a really cool, interesting fact here to the page. He says the Virginia Navy's galley Dragon was built at Fredericksburg, future site of the Middle Pontoon Crossing, and was sunk fighting, I think, down near the mouth of the Chickahominy during Arnold's invasion in early 1781.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, dude, Fredericksburg just becomes so much more badass every time Noel speaks. Like, Noel, thank you so much for all this Fredericksburg history. You make me love Fredericksburg more than I even thought possible, because I love Fredericksburg.
He's
seriously.
Arnold's raid is also very interesting, and I'm actually working on some stuff on Benedict Arnold, because if it weren't
Blandford
for
Petersburg, by the way, because
he is at Petersburg and he fights at Petersburg.
That's what I thought. So Blandford and Petersburg are the same at that point, the same location geographically speaking.
Pretty much the battle at Petersburg happens right behind the crater, back by
where
that
Blandford Church would be today, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's my understanding.
That's what I thought, and that's same with me. I thought that was about the same, because, of course, I'm getting this is just from my viewing of Turn today. I was watching the last few episodes, as I was telling Tim and Darren earlier, but I noticed they were fighting around Blandford, Virginia, and I'm like, the only place in Virginia I know it says Blandford would Blandford Church and that area right around the crater, because the crater and Blandford Church, I mean, hell, they're a stone's throw apart almost.
I mean, it's very sensationalized, right? But
yeah, but very much so.
But it does make you want to learn a little bit. Even you do get the sense in that show, at least, right, that Arnold at one point is viewed as very heroic. He's very much a figure that's revered in the Continental Army. And to be honest, if he hadn't turned his coat in 1780, I do believe, the only person that we would revere more than Benedict Arnold from the Revolution would be Washington, and it would be very close. Because the amount of stuff that man did to keep the cause going, and even in efforts that failed, like at Quebec, attacking during a literal blizzard on Christmas in 1775, quite amazing. The Battle of Valcour Island, which basically closed Lake Champlain early, like when there was nobody that could have stopped a British expedition. Arnold built a fleet and held off the British in a losing effort, but inflicted enough losses that the British weren't able to launch an expedition. And that isn't even, that's before we start talking about Saratoga and his efforts there. So he's a very interesting character. They're doing some reassessment. I mean, not trying to excuse the what he did, for those who don't even want to hear it, even after all these years. I mean, the reality is what, like, some people, his very much one of those situations where, for posterity's sake, if he had died of fever before going up to West Point, even though by that point he was already thinking about what he was going to do, but if he died at any point before he actually did it, we'd be talking of him as one of America's greatest heroes. And that's really not even that isn't an interpretive position. It's pretty much a statement of fact.
That's awesome. So for the remaining part, we got about 20 minutes left of our stream. Can we talk a little bit about just what we did at Jamestown? Since we put that
go for it.
All right, awesome. So One of the other aspects of our trip yesterday was going to Jamestown. And I was fascinated by a few things. Number one, I got to see a Jamestown era musket fired. That was the first for me. I haven't ever seen that before. But I think the highlight of my trip in Jamestown was going on, I think it was the Godspeed that we went on, correct?
Susan Constant.
Susan Constant. Okay. But if you all know me well enough, you know I have obsession with like Titanic, and obviously you see me and Tattooed Historian playing World of Warships a lot. So there's obviously a connection between me and the Navy or the shipping industry, and being able to stand on the Susan Constant it's a reproduction. Obviously, the Susan Constant doesn't exist anymore. But being able to stand on one of those ships and just kind of get a feel for it. First of all, being someone who's 6'2.5", walking through that, I've hit my hip, I hit my head. I mean, it was just, I can tell you, and I have scoliosis. That would have been an incredibly tough time for me to sail on for 4 months. And as little as that might sound, I mean, it's not some big crazy, historical fact, but it's something to factor in. We have this common misconception that everybody was shorter back in the day. That's not the case. A lot of the reasons we had low-hanging ceilings and low door frames, well, we don't have what we have today. We have modern air conditioning. We have modern heat, right? So these smaller areas are to trap heat, to trap cool air, so on and so on. And there are people in this ship that are my height. We don't just grow taller as history goes on. And that's one thing I was trying to consider. I'm just like, damn, I feel bad for people that are 6'3" or 6'2", or God, if you were 7 foot, sorry, this sucks.
Walking with an arch back afterwards, aren't you?
No, it was awful walking through that. And it's cramped. I mean,
I don't know how anyone could spend 4 months on a confined space like that. And
it's so small. And you think about the number of people that end up at Jamestown in 1607. And these quarters, the beds, that was one thing Tim and I were joking about. We looked at the size of the sleeping quarters. I was like, dude, I would have to commit a mutiny to get the captain's quarters just to have my knees bent a little less than they would be. I mean, first of all, I'm not fitting in the spaces that they were sleeping in. There is no way in hell I would be able to fit there. My legs would be hanging off into the doorway if I was sleeping in one of the normal quarters. And the captain's quarters, again, I would be like, okay, I can at least bend my knees and like crouch into this little position. But for 4 months, and yes, you get to sleep maybe outside the ship on one of the islands you would land on for resupply or supplies, whatever it might be. But the ship itself is just so uncomfortable and so tight fitting that it must have been such an uncomfortable journey to get to this new world. And then you have the issues of finding a new place to settle. With the threat of the Spanish attacking, that was a huge fear of the British at the time coming into the new world.
It was the superpower at the time.
Correct. You have the Spanish. What they say that Jamestown was North Florida, that Virginia was considered by the Spanish to be North Florida.
Well, the first attempt, we passed the site. The first European settlement in Virginia was actually an attempted Spanish Jesuit mission that failed, not 10 miles away from Jamestown.
What was the city called again?
I forget its name. To tell you the truth.
I can't remember to save my life.
And they didn't allow photos at the one place they talked about it.
No, they didn't, did they?
So,
of course, but it's still, and a few things about Jamestown Tim and I were talking about too is just like the unfavorable conditions as to where they settled. And he sent me a wonderful. I'll pull up that picture. Is it cool if I share the picture of the water moccasin in the sewer?
Sure.
Awesome. All right, I'm gonna email this to myself real quick while we're chatting. But it brings up a good thing because, Jamestown is sitting along the banks of the James River. So obviously you think that you have a decent water source there. But this is brackish water. This means that it's very
mixed salt and fresh.
But yeah, there is salt water in this actual water. So it's not necessarily the most safe drinking water out there. Number 2. Their goal is to try to find land that is defensible against the Spanish because their major fear is that the Spanish are going to attack them. So with that in mind, they want to find a piece of ground that is favorable to defend. Jamestown Island, in that sense, again, this is in my mind, is absolutely defensible. But is it survivable? That's the question we really have to kind of factor in there. And again, the water source, it was just ridiculous to think about settling there. And Nate, I saw your message, 5'5". Yes, that's average height. Average. That doesn't mean everybody was 5'5". There are still 6'3", there's still 6'2", there's still, and we have that. And Washington was pretty tall too for his time, wasn't he, Tim?
6'2.5".
See, so yeah, and that's that thing. The 5'5" thing, yes, that's, but it's not true. Unfortunately, people were still as tall as we are today. It's still a diverse area. Again, the heights in these buildings and these areas, and this is from working historic homes and doing historic house interpretation for a few years. No, that's unfortunately a myth. And they're not 5'5". It's not the average height. Now, there are people that are probably 5'5". We have a lot of people that are 5'5" today, so we can just go around and say everybody in this city is 5'5" or 5'6" or 5'7", but it's not the case. There are people that are definitely still today the same heights. Human nature just doesn't shoot up, and it takes millions of years for evolution to actually evolve and have us growing where we're like that. That's like I've heard a reference recently that we're losing our pinky toe year by year by year, but it's still going to take a million or so years for us to actually lose that, if we were to ever lose that, because evolution works in that sense. But yeah, like the 5'5" thing, that is just absolutely dismissible at this day and age, because it's just, you have to trap heat in the air somehow when you don't have.
If we did lose our pinkies, then we wouldn't be rolling around the floor when we hit it on the shoulder or something.
Right.
Yeah, I'm not entirely
convinced.
Than that, I broke it before, and I know the issues I had walking.
There is nothing more.
We can't lose that thing. No, man, that thing sucks. But I do see how you can get confused with like it being the thing, that it's everybody was shorter back then, but it's simply not the case. You have to have some type of way to keep comfortable, and we don't have air conditioning in 1607 by any means. We're way away.
You open the window and stick your head out.
Exactly. But if you need to trap heat, the smaller the doorway, the smaller the entryway, the smaller the heating, or the ceiling might be. Your heating is trapped. The warmth that you could have from a fire somewhere is trapped. So yeah, it's a thing. Yeah, it's the height differentiation that people consider all the time. Oh man, they were shorter back then. Well, they weren't.
So basically, if you was tall, you was a knacker.
You were a target on the line.
Yeah.
Yeah, you were definitely. I mean, even still today, if I lined up shoulder to shoulder with men that were maybe shorter and high, I mean, you still have different heights. Yeah,
you'd have a constant headache.
I'm gonna get shot. So that's there, and then I did just get the picture up here that Tim sent me earlier, which is awesome because we were talking about that unfavorable water source at Jamestown, and it lets you guys look at it real quick and see for yourself, because you had a lot of surprises in that water as well. Let's see. Restream takes a second. Do you see our friend in the water there?
Hey.
It's a youngin'.
How about that for some drinking water? That's your Aquafina right there, man. Like that's top of the line Dasani and Deer Park right there for you.
Well, for perspective, so that is off to the west of the site of James Fort. It's kind of off to the west of James Fort is the location of the First Virginia State House, and this low area is in between the two, between the James Fort site and the State House site. So this area in particular is prone to flooding. Depending who you ask, some say the entire Jamestown Island's destined to be underwater. We'll see. They have lost some to erosion, but it's stayed pretty constant since I've been going there since 1994. First time I went to Jamestown was 1 month before discovery of the first post holes.
What year did they discover that?
In 1994. The first time I went there, I remember standing at a statue, the statue of John Smith that's there. So when you went to Jamestown, you'd see a couple things. You'd go to this little rinky-dink visitor center, and then you cross this footbridge onto over what's called the Pitch and Tar Swamp. Pitch and Tar Swamp. So keep in mind, when I'm talking negative things about the location, they're dealing with mosquitoes and malaria and
rampantly
rancid water.
You think August is good on them? No.
High water table. But then, so you cross over onto this main part of the island where the fort is today, and you'd come across to the Tercentenary Monument, whatever. I'm butchering the word. The 300-year monument put there in, what was it, 1907.
Is that the obelisk that's there?
That's the tall statue that's there.
Yeah.
And then you'd go, there was a brick church. Elsewhere on that part of the island, you had ruins from the latter half of the 1600s from what they called the New Town. Then you go to this memorial church, which it was built in the late 17th century, early 18th century. And then right in front of that, kind of on the waterfront, was the statue of John Smith, right? Mm. So I remember the site there, pretty much from the memorial church with the statue of Pocahontas right next to it, to the waterfront was still run by this organization called the Association for Preservation of Virginia Antiquities, the APVA.
Yeah.
And they interpreted at the time, they said, James Fort was somewhere in this vicinity. We're positive it's been lost to James, so it's about 50 yards out into the water. This mound that you see off to the right, that's shaped like a triangle, that's actually a Civil War earthwork called Fort Pocahontas. It has no relation to the event. Well, but a month later, they discovered post holes. So I go back to like the next year, and it's like, okay, so we're pretty sure we have this element of the James Fort, but the rest has been lost to the river. Today, actually, I happen to have the map from yesterday. So this is
it's an awesome map too.
The park brochure. Mm-hmm. And keep in mind, the Park Service doesn't interpret much of that location. So I'm gonna try it.
Oh, it works.
Let me know which way to go so I can see
We can see it good, man. Actually.
Okay, right there, you can see the site, the outline. Mm-hmm. So that little bit that's sticking into the water is all that's been lost to James Fort site. That swamp area where the moccasin is in between that Voorhees Archaearium and the James Fort site. So right there is that culvert on that little the middle path, and that's where that little water moccasin was located. And that's a young guy. Pretty interesting. And actually, the inside, it's so interesting that they identified that a good portion of the memorial church is located in what was now was inside the James Fort, and that they've identified doing. They lifted up the stones. They identified that the church from Jamestown was in the church. And they've got they've put up scaffolding and shown early 17th century architectural techniques. So it's pretty interesting stuff.
Absolutely. Well, folks, I think we should carry our Jamestown conversation into the next live stream that we do here. Does anybody have any last-minute closing remarks for today, Darren? I know you've been listening and absorbing like a sponge today. I love it.
But Noel has put a comment up just before we go.
Oh shoot, yeah, it does. I see an orange blip there. Let me get that up there. Captain John Smith's westward travel on his Rappahannock expedition of 1608, I think, was ended not only by the falls of future Fredericksburg, but also by the party's skirmish with the Native Americans. In general, area north of Tyler's. Hold on, let me hide that. Tyler's future place of employment in Fall Hill. Ooh. They then sniped at Smith's retreating boats. I always imagined this being the first actual combat on the river around Franklin's Crossing. I always forget that Smith was a veteran of the 30 Years' War. That is a hell of a way to end our stream tonight.
I just want to say thank you for giving me a little bit of a history lesson tonight. I've enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate you being here for that and putting up with our colonial banter here.
Good. And now I'm going to get a very good recommendation on my first revolutionary book, which I'm going to buy in a minute on Audible.
Which one's that going to be?
I don't know. You're going to recommend it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that after we're going to finish really quickly. Tim, we want to talk about an episode we have on Sunday that's not on our page. So that's why I was asking you. I think you'll appreciate this. So it's for a few seconds. Hardy, thank you so much for joining as always, man. I really appreciate your viewership and appreciate your commentary. Noel as well. You are a treasure trove of information, and I can't say that enough. Like you always supply us with some of the greatest things, and you make me love Fredericksburg more than I ever thought possible daily. So thank you, and don't ever stop sharing all this great information because I didn't think it possible to love Fredericksburg more.
One day in the future, I'm going to be living in the Fredericksburg area. Watch this space.
I look forward to that. Just God, if that means I have to go to the pub every night with you.
Wow.
Yeah, that's what it means.
Someone's got to. I mean, you can't drink the water. So, that's Jamestown.
Yeah, that's right. But I mean, the Rappahannock isn't necessarily potable water either. So,
no, I mean it's
it
looks
like the tea
tainted by the tea that you keep chucking in it.
I still have that tea bag in the back of my trunk, by the way. That one little tea bag you left, and I was thinking about actually pulling it out and brewing it tonight, but the mead called my name, so that was what took priority. But folks, again, thank you guys so much for joining another episode of our Unfiltered Conversations. We may or may not have an episode Sunday because we have something really cool coming up on Sunday, and we will announce that as the week goes on. But until then, I'm sure you'll see me and see us at some point this week. You guys have a fantastic Monday. Happy Martin Luther King Jr. Day. We'll see you guys next time.